Welcome to Athletic Director U. My name is Bryan Blair. I'm the Deputy Athletic Director at Washington State University. I'm joined today by Dr. Kirk Schulz, President of Washington State University. Kirk, thanks for joining us.
Really glad to be here, Bryan. Thanks for having me.
So, Kirk, let's hop right in. For those of you not familiar, you worked at a number of institutions, mostly land grant. Can you kind of walk us through your career decisions and what led you to each type of institution and why land grant type institutions seem to fit what you want out of your career the most?
Sure. I've worked at a bunch of different universities throughout my career, and I started actually at a regional urban serving university, Old Dominion University, where my parents taught, lived close by, kind of worked there, decided to major instead of pre-med to go into chemical engineering. The only Chem E programs in the state of Virginia at that time were University of Virginia and Virginia Tech. And I wound up transferring to Virginia Tech, where I wound up staying, getting my undergraduate degree there, my PhD. And that is a land grant university. And up in the hills of Virginia, a very isolated, small college town, and a very loyal kind of alumni base. And really kind of like the blue collar style of the institution. It was a large engineering and STEM focused, ag focused university. It's broadened out quite a bit today, but at that particular time, you went to Virginia Tech if you wanted an engineering degree, an ag degree, a STEM degree. That was really why you went there, and had a great experience there. And then as I went through my career, worked at a couple other types of places, University of North Dakota, a Division II school, and saw the passion that alumni and fans had at the Division II level. There was a little contrast in terms of, number of people in the stands, from Virginia Tech. Then had an opportunity to work at a really kind of focused engineering school called Michigan Tech in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, another D2 school, but they really struggled to get people to come to campus, very isolated. You just couldn't get, folks and alumni to want to necessarily come back in the same way. And Noel and I, at that point, we had two young children. We really missed the Division I campus atmosphere. Then I had an opportunity to work at Mississippi State in the Southeastern Conference, Kansas State in the Big 12, and now Washington State in the Pac-12. So land grants have been part of my heritage. We've worked at several other places, and that's really where I wanted to be in my career. So it means a lot to me to be a university that focuses on the state where we are, and it's given young people that opportunity to come and have a great educational experience.
I love hearing about your background, the passion you have about it, because you've got a clear identity of where you want to take your career. I think so many of us are navigating these spaces and wondering, okay, what's my fit? It's interesting to hear you talk about your fit. And part of that, I think, comes from your background as a chemical engineer. And I'd love for you to expound a little bit on how that background as a chemical engineer allows you to lead institutions and people the way you do.
Yeah, so engineering is an interesting career choice. And when I was going through my undergraduate degree program, I won't say the good old days because it wasn't, but the sort of philosophy when I went through engineering school in the 80s was, there was this really high bar, and it was your job as a student to get over that bar. And if you couldn't do it, then they wanted you to go major in something else. And so I think that level of needing to reach and strive and push myself, I think, is part of what I learned in engineering school. And it wasn't all fantastic. My wife is also an engineer. She's an electrical engineer. She was at the top of her class. Let's just say I was not. And I failed a course. And I remember sitting down one day with my engineering advisor, and he just said, Kirk, I just don't think you've got what it takes to be a chemical engineer. And, everybody's got these points in your life, right, where things don't go maybe the way you want to. And how you respond to that is really critical. And so I remember walking out of that office saying, I'm going to show that person he is wrong. I know I'm smart enough to do this. And I kind of refocused my energy and, wind up having a very successful career. But engineering teaches a couple things. I think it teaches you to look at problems holistically. It teaches you to, if you got something you're trying to do, you write down, what do you know? These are basic engineering principles. What do you know? What are you trying to solve? What are the tools that you need to get there? And I still use that same philosophy today as a university president. I think it also taught communication skills are important. It's great to have the analytical skills. You can't communicate. That doesn't really help very much. On the downside, a lot of times people tend to think of engineers as people with zero EQ, all spreadsheet driven. And I think one of the things I had to learn was that as comfortable as I was with engineering, and comfortable as I was with numbers and solving that way, that EQ part of what you do as a leader is sometimes just as important as understanding all the facts and figures. So those are all things I learned from chemical engineering. I would do the same thing if I went back again today. I think it's been a great degree program, helped prepare me well to lead.
Absolutely. And I don't want to become too much of a cheerleader during this video, but I just think you have the perfect balance between what you call the EQ and your ability to communicate and across a broad spectrum of stakeholders. But at the same time, you think very methodically about issues. You never seem to get too high, too low, not a whole lot of emotion into it. Okay, what's the problem? How do we find the solution? And I think as a leader, when you set that example for the people that you serve, those people that you serve also take on those characteristics. And I think that's one reason why Washington State's been so successful under your leadership.
Well, thank you. I will say, though, that it wasn't always that way. Leadership is a journey, and, you learn things as you go through. And I recollect I was president of the Baptist Student Union when I was at Virginia Tech, and we had a leadership training thing. And it was one of these deals where, a plane's gone down and, there's 10 people and only 3 are going to live, that kind of a planning exercise. And so as a leadership team, we had to spend, 5 minutes, and you had to look at this scenario, go through the leadership team and kind of pick the 3 people who are going to live. So we got it done. I mean, in 3 minutes, we had our 3 people. Then you looked around the room and there was carnage everywhere. I mean, I was so focused on getting it done that I forgot that there were people involved and that you had to make sure you listened to what people's thoughts were. And this is a simple exercise. You look back at my career and say, Kirk, this is one thing. But I think if I go back, that was sort of this moment for me that was an awakening is, people matter, the way the people on your team matter. And even though you disagree and you got something you got to get to, you better make sure you bring them with you. Otherwise, you're going to be there with a solution and find yourself alone. And that's really a critical thing.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I think about in my role is, although athletics is very visible, it's a hot topic. People like talking about it. We're a very small piece of our overall institution, visible, but very small. And I think our purpose is to help elevate and push the mission of the entire university. As you think about your career and some of the stops and the athletic programs that you've had, I mean, what examples come to mind of athletic departments really help further in the mission of the university?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. And I can think back several things over time. The first is the point of pride in getting people back to campus. I mentioned that I'd worked at an institution that very fine academic institution. Michigan Tech has got a great academic reputation and just struggled to get people to come back. And that was different than my experience at, say, North Dakota or Virginia Tech, where football Saturdays, men's and women's basketball brought people back to campus. And guess what? We always focus around the athletic part of that. But guess what? Students come back. They meet with their former professors. They walk through the building. They want to see the labs. They bring their kids with them. And I just have looked around. You don't have other ways to really kind of do that. So intercollegiate athletics, I think, provides this glue that we get used to. But if you work at a place that doesn't have that, sometimes you really miss out on that opportunity to have that, people come back and have that football Saturday kind of institutional point of pride. The other thing is I think that small college communities are heavily reliant on all those people kind of coming into town. And sometimes we can be very insular and we think, well, within the university, what does it do? But just think of what happens on those Saturdays when those hotels aren't filled up, when you've got local businesses that rely on everybody kind of coming into town, and that's not there. So, intercollegiate athletics, I think, plays a really large role in the marketing, the branding, the point of pride for the institution. Now, not for every single person. I mean, there's some people that said, hey, I didn't go to football games. I wasn't into that scene, and had a great experience at the university. And I don't want to take anything away from that. But on the other hand, it is a way to make sure that people stay associated and affiliated with the university throughout their whole careers. This is Final Four week coming up this next week. People are attuned to where did their university, where were they in the NCAA tournament? What happens? The friendly office kind of banter that goes on between people at rival schools. The same thing during bowl season. Those are things too that are intangibles that I think are also important for so many people.
So one of the things I love about college athletics is how it brings people together. And when I first got to Washington State, I think I was at a tennis match and I saw you and your wife, Dr. Noel Schulz, and you were both in support. You had Coug gear on. You came up, you introduced yourself. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little startled because I'm just not used to seeing a president be that available. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage athletics, how you lead athletics, but also empower the leaders that you've hired to kind of oversee their areas and be successful?
Yeah, great question, Brian. So when I was at Mississippi State University, I was serving as vice president for research, and I had career aspirations to be a university president, realized that that was a hole, that was a gap in things. And so I sat down with the athletic director at Mississippi State at that time. His name was Larry Templeton. Said, Larry, can you mentor me? And what would be your ideal president in terms of the way he or she assisted you in kind of running a SEC Division I athletics program? And Larry and I sat down every other month and had a chance, and he opened everything. There was nothing he wouldn't talk about. And he really went through and provided me some background on what he thought it was important to do. Interestingly, I ran into Larry multiple years later. I've been president for a while, and it was at a bowl game. He came up and we had a chance to chat a little bit, and he remembered those conversations as well. The second thing is, look, I'm a big believer you hire the absolute best leaders that you can. You hold them accountable, but you give them the freedom to really lead and work in their particular area or space. That should apply just as much to finance administration, intercollegiate athletics, to the provost of the university. And I want to be supportive. I want to be seen as somebody they go, hey, that person, Kirk, has got my back, but they're going to allow me the freedom to make the decisions that I need to. And that's the way I've just worked with intercollegiate athletics, with other places. And I found that to be a very successful leadership model for me. It fits where I want to go. And I think it's part of the reason that we've had the success, not just in intercollegiate athletics, but at WSU that we've enjoyed.
Absolutely. And you dropped a couple gems there. I think one, you at Mississippi State, humbling yourself enough and saying, hey, I need to go visit with athletic director because I know I want to be a president one day. I need to figure out, okay, what does that look like from that seat? And open yourself up to that feedback. And I think as young administrators, a lot of times you go to conferences and everybody runs up to the athletic director and conference commissioner after the session and ask, hey, how should I do this? What should I do? Not too often do we run to the president or the provost or the dean or whoever it may be on campus that one day might hold that role and say, hey, what does athletics look like to you? How can I be of value to your area? And I think that's something I know you've implored some of us to do, and something that a lot of us in the industry probably should do a better job, especially that provost role. In some ways, that seems to be kind of the stop before president on many campuses.
Yeah, Brian, there are a couple other things that come to mind on this. First is I've seen some people that were at the extreme. So I worked with an individual once that, he was down on the football field during games, on the sidelines, kind of slapping helmets when football players came off, going to practices, running wind sprints with the linemen, and there was not the gap that was really appropriate. Then I've sort of seen presidents too that go, hey, I'm an academic, intercollegiate athletics is a necessary evil. They sort of backed away from it so much that they didn't provide the support the athletic director sometimes needed. So, to me, it's like everything in life. You want to be balanced. You want to be kind of right down the middle. And but I've seen examples on both sides, and neither of them seem to me to be the way that the most effective leaders were out there. One of my mentors was the former president of Virginia Tech. He's passed now, but he was also dean of engineering there. His name was Paul Torgeson. And he told me when I was a young administrator, he said, Kirk, my advice to you is, as president, you should have a working relationship with your football coach and your men's basketball coach. Now, this was about a decade ago. And he said, you don't want to be in there. You're not trying to do the AD job, but you should be able to pick up the phone and call and talk with them. And it's not seen as a penalty. It's not seen that they've done something wrong, but that you want to just be invested and know that. And I've also found that is really excellent advice. I've used that at each presidency that I've had. And that means that sometimes you sit down with somebody and you're not talking about football, you're not talking about basketball, you're talking about their family, you're getting to know them a little bit. They're getting to know you a little bit about what your interests are. And I would encourage everybody watching this. I think I do that. I make sure that my athletic director is supportive of me doing that. But at the same time, I found that to be really productive. I now expand that out, and I want to have a good enough working relationship with all of our coaches that I can text back and forth when things aren't going so well to say, hey, we're there, we got your back. I also want to be there to kind of praise. And when you have that big victory or you got that big recruit or something really notable, positive happen, they should expect that the president's attuned enough of what's going on that I'm, saying, hey, congratulations on this. So I expand that out a little bit from just those two. But I do think if you look at presidents, chancellors around the country, where you can sometimes get into challenges if you don't have that working relationship with those really prominent coaches and individuals on your campus community.
Absolutely. And I'm pretty sure if I saw a president running wind sprints with the team, I'd be more impressed than I would be caught off guard. So we'll see if we can set that up.
You would not be impressed if you saw me running wind sprints with our team.
So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about my boss, Pat. I mean, I think you've been able to hire 2 NACDA Athletic Directors of the Year in your history between Pat and John Curry, who's now at Wake Forest, but was at Kansas State with you. I think the world of Pat, and I don't know John very well, but I know you think very highly of what he was able to do there. I mean, what are some of those core traits you saw between the two of them that have made them so successful?
I've been fortunate to work with some really talented athletic directors, some nearing the end of their careers, some sort of, really at the beginning of their careers. And I look for a couple kind of key things when I'm hiring. One, I want somebody to come into a place that has some idea of what they're going to do. And when we were hiring John at Kansas State, I was a brand new president. He was, kind of a senior associate AD. And, every AD candidate I talked with, I would always ask, how do you go hire coaches? And, they'd all run through the same kind of things. And, I have my list. I have my working list. I can remember this distinctly like it was yesterday. I asked John that. He ran through all that. And he slid a piece of paper over. And it was names. And it was, if I was hired as Kansas State athletic director and had to hire a rowing coach tomorrow, here's who the first person on my list is. If I had to hire a women's basketball coach, here's the first person on my list. And what impressed me was it wasn't this generic, hey, I'll get out there and figure it out. It was, hey, I'm working this all the time, thinking about this all the time. And Kirk, to show you that this is not me just making something up, here's what it is. Now, I didn't take that piece of paper. It wasn't intended to be the kind of thing I walked away from. But I said, this is a person who's thought carefully through what they would do. That was number one. Number two, I look for somebody who is going to understand the culture of a place. There's a lot of talented presidents, athletic directors, coaches out there, but it really is, do they fit the culture of a place, or are they willing to take the time to understand the culture of a place? What worked at Kansas State, what worked at Washington State, and what worked at Mississippi State are very different. Doesn't mean that we don't want talented men and women in those particular positions, but there's also something to be said. Are we going to be able to tee up somebody for success? The third thing is, I'm a big believer that fundraising is a really key attribute these days of presidents, athletic directors, deans, all of that. And I was looking for somebody with some fundraising chops that had gone out and wasn't looking for the quick buck, wasn't looking to sit down with somebody when maybe they could land $100,000 gift. They walk away with 10 grand because it was easier, or they didn't have to invest in it, or they didn't have to take the time. And, we had a donor at Kansas State University. I used to meet with him at the Flying J truck stop. It wasn't a glamorous place. And, a lot of times we didn't even talk about money. We talked about what we were trying to do, what we're trying to build. And I was looking for somebody that had that focus around relationships and the importance of relationships in building things, which means it's harder, takes longer, and you don't sometimes get that quick payout that sometimes people want to have. So those are all things that I think I looked at when I hired John, when I hired Pat. And look, we had a lot of other people we talked to at both Kansas State and here at Washington State that probably could have also been really good. But for both of those individuals, the first time I met them, I thought, this is the person that I think has got it. Let's now explore a little bit and see what other people think.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about John and the list. And I think about what your previous answer was about the value of being an engineer and how you process things. And that seems like an obvious marriage for what John presented and who you are as a person. And I think sometimes we talk about fit. We sometimes get lost in that term, but I think logically there was a fit right there. And then you and I have talked a lot about the value of relationships in so many different areas. And I think that's become a theme of this conversation, but certainly in the fundraising realm, and not just looking for the low hanging fruit so you can check a box and go about your day, but really invest in those relationships, really nurturing them along. And then when the right time comes, being able to find a way to support the institution. So, I mean, those are two I've listened and learned from you a lot, but certainly you gave up the secret sauce a little bit to the industry as a whole.
Well, the other thing I would point out too is really talented athletic directors, and then I talk about coaches, wind up taking the attributes of any place and make it a strength. And it's interesting. When I was in Starkville, Mississippi, people talked about, oh, if we were only Tuscaloosa, if we were only in Atlanta, or all these other things, recruiting would be so much easier. I heard the same thing in Manhattan. I heard the same thing when I moved to Pullman. Oh, this is a tough job. You can't get people to want to go there because we're not in LA or whatever. What happens is you find individuals who say, hey, we're not gonna look upon this as a detriment. We're gonna look upon this as something unique, something positive, and we're gonna turn that into a strength. And I've watched coaches do that here. And I'll use our former football coach as a great example, Coach Mike Leach. He went and he didn't try and say, come to Pullman, it's going to be just like being in Seattle or just like being in the Bay Area. He talked about the uniqueness and turned that into really a strength for us. I've watched Pat do that incredibly effectively here. And then I've watched our new coaches as they come on board, Kyle Smith in men's basketball, Cammie Etheridge in women's basketball. They turn this into a strength. And all of a sudden you start seeing some success because they bought in not just to the community, but what we have here, and said, hey, let's figure out a way to make this a success. So, we've been fortunate so far. I've hired some great people who've done really well, but there's some characteristics on all those individuals that I think have also led to their success.
Absolutely. I'm fighting my urge to take down notes right now because you're dropping so much knowledge. I really appreciate it. I think as I looked upon John and I saw a tweet, I think it was you or Noel tweeted out when Chad Weber got the Oklahoma State AD job, and just talking about the number of ADs you had on staff there at Kansas State. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw in those individuals at that step below the athletic director realm, and maybe what turned those three individuals into future ADs and what you saw at that stage?
Yeah, what was the characteristic of that group at Kansas State, and I would say our group at Washington State too, is all the people, the associate ADs, had two things in common. One, they wanted to do absolutely the very best job they could at their current job. And this is the really important one. Second, they were like sponges. If somebody was working over in development, they were really interested in saying, hey, look, the development thing is good, but I need to understand how to hire a coach. I need to understand how to do marketing and ticket sales. I need to understand compliance and how that works. And what I found is people wanted to know about the other jobs. And there was this camaraderie between that sort of senior AD group that everybody kind of wanted to understand and know and support what everybody else was doing. So that when they sat down for an interview, they could say, hey, this is my portfolio. This is what I did. I really kicked butt, did a great job in this. But, I had to learn from Scott Garrett about ticket sales. I had to learn from Laird Veach about the relationship that he had with our head football coach and all those sort of student athletes that were, transformational in their particular time. And if you kind of go through that, each one of them really tried hard to support each other and learn what the other was doing to prepare them so that when they got that opportunity, they could also do the same thing. I think the other thing that all of them learned in my view, and all of us have learned here and have been my last 3 stops, is we had a lot of resources compared to some other schools, but I've never been a place that we could solve it with just money. There are some places that have, very large budgets and they can kind of go through people quickly and all that. And I'm not begrudging any of that, but I've always worked at places where we had to be really thoughtful and careful, and just throwing money at something wasn't a way to solve it. And I think that's a key characteristic, that if people learn how to do that, learn how to do it well, that's going to serve them extremely well, no matter where they go. If you go to a highly resourced program, then you're going to have those opportunities maybe to spend money a little bit more freely. But you know what? There are a lot of great jobs at fantastic institutions that aren't going to be able to spend money like that. And I think it's important to learn, how do you be successful? How do you take that extra little step when hiring a coach, hiring a new colleague, to make sure you've got somebody that understands the environment that you're in and helps you learn how to thrive in the environment that you have?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you just talked about, and we've talked about a lot of here, is just being willing to think differently. And I think for us, when we found success is having that willingness to think differently, but I also think when you do have success, it almost makes it that much sweeter. At least to me, it does. When you didn't just throw money at a problem and make it go away. You worked really, really hard, but you thought creatively about how to solve that problem. It just makes it a whole lot of fun. And I think one of the things you touched on was the value of curiosity, the value of asking that second, third question, want to know what's going on, wanting to know how things are done. And then how can you add a perspective, or how can you add some thoughts, or what can you glean from that situation? And I think sometimes curiosity, we all have a phone at our fingertips, but we have less curiosity as a society sometimes. And I think that's a really important value for young administrators to have. You've talked a little bit about this piece of it, but we've had some success here. I mean, going back to your engineering background, if there was a formula for success, what would you draw it up as?
I think the first thing, hire the absolute best people that you can. And that means they got to fit what you need at that particular time. So when I first got here, we had a lot of financial issues at the university as a whole. And it was clear that I needed to go out and hire the absolute best chief financial officer I could get, with a wide range of experience that could really help us do that. We were able to go and attract Stacy Pearson, who had worked at 3 different places. She had an interest in intercollegiate athletics, and that wasn't just a numbers person, a spreadsheet person. She was like, hey, we're here to educate students, and I've got to keep that in mind in every financial decision that we have to make. So I think, hiring the very best people. Second, you got to give people some runway. And, every leader I've ever talked to goes, oh yeah, hire the best people and let them do their jobs. But I've worked for a lot of people that would stand in front of big groups and say that, and then they would micromanage you so badly that as a subordinate, you weren't really able to really kind of do on your own. And I think that means that we need to focus on the outcome. Where do you want to get to, and not the pathway so often. So, you know what? If I hire you to do something, Bryan, you're going to probably do it differently than I would. And that should be okay. But if I try and get you to do it exactly the way I did, then you're a set of hands. You're not really an integral part of the leadership team. So I think it's also, as a leader, I've got to allow people to get there in a different way than I would, support them through that, and not try and make little mini Kirks out of everybody on my leadership team. That never works. So I think that means I got to allow people sometimes to screw up a little bit. And that doesn't mean you chastise them, but you then afterwards say, hey, what can we do differently next time? And I generally ask, how can I support you and provide advice and support differently for you? Third, if you hire really talented people, they're going to have opportunities. And I've never been one to say, hey, you gotta bide your time. You gotta spend X number of years in this position or this place. Opportunities come up, and I think people go and have that opportunity to interview or explore another position somewhere. I think we have to encourage that. And sometimes that means somebody's going to be with you for a few years and they're going to leave and go on and do great things. Great. They were with us for a few years and we were part of their journey. But I think if I go to somebody and say, hey, I got this great opportunity, I just like to pursue this, if that person comes out and goes, well, Kirk, you've only done this for 2 years. Why would you even look at that? You're being disloyal. Those kind of things. I think what that does is that sends a message back. That person that I'm working with or for isn't really worried about me. They're really worried about themselves. And I think that's another important thing is encourage your team members to look out there at those opportunities and encourage them. And you know what? More often than they're not going to say, hey, this is a great environment. Then I can be really selective now. I don't have to look for the first road out. Fourth, I'm a big believer in, goal setting, setting high goals, but, celebrate along the way. And I'll use men's basketball as a great example. This year we finished with a winning record. And I think if I talk to our men's basketball coach or anybody else, people can always look and say, well, we didn't win as many conference games as we wanted to, or this happened or that happened. And I'm like, look where we were 3 years ago. Let's take a step back and sometimes celebrate our success of where we are and recognize it's a journey. And, tough things in life are not done with a snap of a fingers. And sometimes I think it's so difficult. We have all these high achieving men and women around us that we got to step back sometimes and acknowledge the journey and acknowledge the small successes when they happen. Then when the big successes occur, everybody feels like they got there together. I think we make a mistake in athletics so often that we have these sort of highly energetic, extroverted athletic directors and coaches, and sometimes student athletes, and we forget they're human beings like everybody else. When the door's shut, they're frustrated. When things don't go well, they can get angry. They can feel depressed or things like that. And that's where those encouraging words sometimes from people saying, hey, hang in there, got your back. We're making the right moves. Just keep at it. Those things mean so much sometimes when people are down, because when you're up, everybody's saying you're the greatest of all time. But when things don't go well, that's when you sometimes really need it. And that's what I think we have to do as leaders as well.
Absolutely. I'm listening to you talk, and I just know the applications to any job we post from here on out are about to skyrocket, because anybody can see why you're a great leader. I really, really appreciate it. So, Kirk, I think one of the things about you that I immediately noticed when I got here is how involved you are nationally. I think you're a former chair of the NCAA Board of Governors. For those who don't know, that's the highest ranking body within the NCAA. You're on the College Football Playoff Board of Managers. You're on the Pac-12 Executive Council, which oddly enough is now leading the search for our next Pac-12 commissioner. Why is that important to you? Why is that level of national service important?
Well, when I started my job as a president at Kansas State, I was always interested in intercollegiate athletics from a leadership management point of view. And I really do firmly believe it's an integral part of our campus community. If I look back at Virginia Tech, one of the things that they did years ago is they would play all these Thursday night games. And I know it's disruptive to campus or whatever, but I watched not just their athletic program, but I watched the reputation of my alma mater continue to take off. Donations went up. They hired great leaders. The student body got larger. Now, was it all due to Thursday night football? No. But that visibility, it went sort of from this, pretty good regional university in the mountains of Virginia to having a national brand, and their willingness to sort of say, hey, I'll take that time slot. I'll do that. That's part of their elevation of Virginia Tech as a whole institution. So when I saw those kind of things, Brian, and had those opportunities to be involved at a national level, I felt it was important. If it's a passion point for me, if it's something I think I can have a positive influence on nationally, that was something I was really interested in doing and trying to marry, if you will, the academic side of universities, as well as the athletic side and the positive impact that has on student athletes. It's not all glamour work. I will say the national stuff is tough. You bring in people together from very different viewpoints and backgrounds. And let me tell you that some really small Division I programs out there and schools like Texas and Ohio State and others that, have this really massive set of programs. You're trying to get leaders at those institutions to all focus around the student athlete and what we can do to support our student athletes. It's a leadership challenge like none other that I've seen. But at the same time, when you get something done at that level, it's a great deal of satisfaction. And frankly, we need presidents, chancellors, leaders, academic leaders to be involved and engaged with the leadership of intercollegiate athletics on a national basis. There's lots of opportunities to be involved, and I want people, if they do it, to bring their skills that they've learned to get to one of these jobs to kind of help us. We forget sometimes when we talk about policies and serving on all these things that at the end of the day, it's about ensuring a great experience for our student athletes, regardless of that institution. And they're trying to compete at an elite level. They're trying to also go get a degree and move on in life. And that requires a lot of thought on how to do that well. And it's been one of the more satisfying things I've done in my career is being able to do that at the national level.
Absolutely. And I think going back to, maybe your first answer you gave and talking about the value, not only of a plan and a vision, but being able to communicate that to a broad range of stakeholders. And as you talk about some of these rooms and dealing with these leaders with their own self-interest and trying to bring those together, I think that takes a certain skill set that you have to have. So I guess that takes us to the elephant in the room, right? The Pac-12 is searching for a commissioner. As you think about today's landscape with so much change on the horizon, what makes for a good commissioner?
I have to look out there at some of the individuals that, I didn't know them all equally well, but I got to know a lot of them a little, to different levels when I served in the NCAA. And, there's some characteristics that I saw of many of them that I think are important for us, moving forward. Many of them really respected the role of campuses. They really looked and understood the importance of their particular campuses. When I was in the Big 12, Bob Bowlesby who's been the commissioner there for, I guess, 6-7 years now. I remember him coming to Manhattan, Kansas, spending a couple days there, toured facilities, talked to students, talked to faculty and staff, before he just wanted to know a little bit about the DNA of an institution, not just what you see on a football Saturday, but what we were all about. And he did that at all those different locations. And look, the people who live in Ames, Iowa, feel passionately about their experiences there. They feel passionately about their community and their university. That's going to be different than they do and feel in Austin, Texas. And you don't know that if you don't go out there and really get to know that. And I think the really successful commissioners understood that. The second thing is, at the end of the day, I think commissioners also have this really tough job, right? You've got to worry about the student athletes and a lot of the issues for student athletes of today. You have to balance that out, though, that you have an important fiscal role. Is at the end of the day, their job is to ensure that we have, adequate resources coming in to compete at the level that we want to. And that's not easy, right? You do a contract in year one and you're the greatest of all time because of all those financial resources. 5 years later, somebody else has come and signed a bigger contract. And so I think a great commissioner is always out there looking for how can we enhance revenue, for our particular conference, our particular league, in keeping with our values. And I think that's an important part is, look, in the Southeastern Conference, they've got a certain set of things that are really important to their presidents and their fan base and where they are. We've got a different set of things on the West Coast. And that's not that one set is better than the other. It's just reflective of where they are. And I think great commissioners also understand that as well. So, I know that's a little vague, but those are the kind of things that if I look back at a Mike Slive and some of the individuals I had a chance to work with, I think those are the characteristics that really have shown out. And look, we got a great gig going here on the Pac-12. We have fantastic schools, great footprint, passionate fan base. It's different than the fan bases at other places around the country, but equally as passionate about their school. I think we're going to go get a great commissioner who's going to come in here and take us to the next level over the next decade.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you said earlier about some of the ADs you've had that have come into situations and turned whatever it was within the institution into an opportunity. And hopefully our next commissioner can do that with the Pac-12 because we are unique, but there's a lot of powerful stories to be told within this conference footprint. I've been excited to get to know them. So, Kirk, thank you a lot for joining us today. I think I'm always value your support, your mentorship, and I think our listeners will enjoy this as well.
Well, Brian, I appreciate you having me. And look, I'm happy to talk with anybody at any time. If they say, hey, Kirk, I appreciate a 15-minute discussion. May not be able to do it the next day, but I'm happy to talk with anybody out there. And there's a lot of young talent in intercollegiate athletics. I think we're going through a time of intense change in intercollegiate athletics. But regardless of that, if you look 3 or 4 years out, we're going to need outstanding men and women to aspire to these leadership positions. And I hope everybody watching this will continue to do that. Look to get better, learn from your peers and colleagues, and never dismiss an opportunity, in my mind, that comes your way based sometimes on location or where it is. And just a quick story to finish this off. When I was at Mississippi State and we were trying to hire some faculty in engineering, we'd have some candidates sometimes that said, oh, I've never been to the state, never been to the area, but I just know I wouldn't like it there. And I remember talking to people and saying, hey, give us a chance. Come take a look. Get to know the people a little bit. Give us a couple days. And if you come down here and say, hey, after a couple days don't like it, that's fine. But never dismiss an opportunity because it's something you read somewhere or heard about. Go look at a place, look at the people, talk to the student athletes, whatever it is. And I think you sometimes walk away and going, man, I'm glad I did not dismiss this because I just decided I wouldn't want to live there. Go take a look at those opportunities. You'll be glad that you did. So, Bryan, thanks. And I can't end with anything else besides a go Cougs.
Absolutely. I expect nonetheless. It's Dr. Kirk Schulz, President of Washington State University. And again, this is Bryan Blair, Deputy AD at Washington State University. As always, stay humble, stay curious. We'll catch you next time.